Spartan mothers would give their sons over.
Yeah, they would. Yeah.
To the fathers, to the men,
Yeah.
collectively, wouldn't they, at a certain age?
They would.
Whilst it was a very brutal way of doing things,
Yes.
nonetheless, it marked that transition, that rite of passage, and
Yes.
the release from the mother and into the world of man.
And they had a way of passing over, once they'd confirmed the boy, their son, and a way a mother does that is obviously to give all the love and nurturing that the child needs, and then to allow him to form his identity as being different from her, the separation which is important. And then you're going to be like your father. Now the father then should say, yes you are, but you're not ready yet. I'll give you some idea of what it means to be a man.
Welcome back everybody to Jung To Live By. Now over the last 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 weeks, something like that, we've been building up a little mini series on the mother complex, and the response has been really, really good. It's been very, very humbling. We really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And so we thought that, well, the natural progression, like in lifespan development, is to move from the mother onto the father, at least to touch on that for a few videos or so. Hopefully that's useful for you guys. So, I mean, we've spoken briefly before, but I guess just to remind the guys, the idea of healthy lifespan development schema is when a child is born, they're attached to their mother, and the mother has a specific role. Then as the child gets older, usually there's an instinctive push towards the father, and obviously the mother and the father, if they're sorted out instinctually, they facilitate that movement onto the father. Then the child or the adolescent moves on towards friends. Then from there, you move on towards a partner. Now, I want to ask you guys about the differences in this between men and women as well, actually, to make sure we cover sort of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've covered the mother stage, if you like, of development and what happens with that. But what happens if that is not moved on to the father stage?
Yeah, thanks, James. We really need to get back to basics on this, I feel. So it's really clear there is a difference in imprinting for a child of either biological gender onto the father than from the mother, and those differences are subtle and they're unique to both of the original biological genders. But for survival and for adaptation, it's more important that the child adapts and quickly onto the mother. That's for good biological reasons. The father is different. The father is the first real social role that we engage with as children, that goes beyond the normal remit of the mother, and that's why there's such a lot of conflict, and if you like, why the Oedipus complex for Freudians forms in the way that it does. But for a boy, it's vitally important that the mother confirms the fact that not only is the child loved and connected to the mother, but is different in some way to her. And that difference is to be reflected in the relationship that he should have to his father, which is one of identity. The boy is a proto-father, a proto-adult male, and the process of moving the attachment in part from the mother towards the father will be gradual, but the core of that is identity for a boy. He has to identify with the father so he can move into relationship with the wider peer group, and in normal development this is through friends in childhood and then into adolescence and then on into the reproductive stage of life. That's what biology intends as a baseline. Obviously there are all sorts of variations from that are possible and are quite normal, but as with any of these stages, there is a pathology which can typically form, and the pathology in relationship to the father, it can be as damaging as it is with the mother, but it's in a different way.
Okay. Is that the same with men and women?
Well, would you say, women, Paul, that the significant difference is that it's the opposite sex, the father is the opposite biological sex for a girl, whereas it's the same sex for a boy, and that facilitates that in a different way. How do you feel on that?
I think, yes, very much so. I think we've mentioned this before, that women, daughters, are prepared genetically to receive men, and therefore their fathers as being somewhat strange and alien to them for obvious reasons, and that there's probably a good genetic basis for that, as well as obviously them being different in terms of experiencing them psychosocially as well. And certainly the dreams and the fantasies of daughters play out in that way too. They reflect this kind of skewed towards the negative and to receive men negatively initially more than positively even. It just seems to be the way that things are set up. And it seems quite a strange thing to say, but I think, as we've said before, there are good survival reasons for that, potentially. If we were to go right the way back to kind of Stone Age civilizations and look at the value of women, young women being drawn towards men who were more aggressive and were prepared to go out there and to hunt and to bring the resources back for the family. So there are good genetic reasons for that. And like I say, that tends to be borne out in the dreams and the fantasies of young women as they too go through adolescence. They experience images of men which tend to be dark and threatening and sinister. So that's a definite difference, and I think you've actually said to me, Steve, as well, that strangely that you get that opposite spin for men, in that they tend to want to draw positive women towards them as they go through adolescence and beyond. Yeah,
there's an idealisation, would you agree, James, of the feminine that you get with Jung's classical anima, you don't necessarily get with the classical animus. With the animus you tend to get a default negative,
yes, you do.
And
yes.
With men, when they think of the Platonic form of the feminine, for example, and as it appears in art and literature, that kind of thing, you tend to get an idealised Platonic form. And there's almost certainly a biological reason for that. I'm sure you could elaborate upon that.
In Jung's works in particular, and in sort of more orthodox Jungian's works, at least from my reading, the anima does have that idealised image, and it's almost as if the way it's written about is more vibrant. And I wonder if that reflects on the psychology of the people who are writing it.
For sure.
The psychology of Jung, because this is a thing. When I was looking, I like putting things on the thumbnails to the videos and the intro to the videos.
Yes.
There's loads of anima paintings around, but for an animus painting, that's kind of a more difficult thing to find. And if they do exist, it sticks in your mind less, which is incredibly strange.
Yeah, that's interesting from the classical psychodynamic point of view. From the biological point of view, do you think there might well be a difference in terms of reproductive viability when under environmental stress? For example, that the dark animus figure that Pauline's describing is likely to be your stereotypical rather than archetypal, or are they different? Bad boy.
Yes.
And in that sense, traits that might be considered psychopathic today could have been very, very adaptive in the past, and this is so deeply ingrained genetically that is favoured from the genome as a potential adaptation under terrible environmental pressure, the Paleolithic period, for example. But the reverse might be true, and that's why we have this idealised view of women innate in us, it seems, men, that you would want a woman who is not promiscuous, who is likely to breed only with you and not with all the others, that kind of thing, and to avoid and to settle the pressures between the sexes under pressure of a Paleolithic environment. It's important that men do idolise women to some extent. If they didn't, they're more likely to harm them, if you think about it. And you get this in war, of course. You get mass rape, you get murder, that kind of thing. But if men are programmed not to want to kill women, but to breed with them, to settle down with them, to idealise them, that's less likely to happen. That will favour the genome of the species as a whole. But under the pressure of war and competition between male groups, women will realise some men will do those kinds of things. So if they can ingratiate themselves in with the bad boy, their chances of survival are higher. This is in a Paleolithic environment, not the 21st century.
Yeah.
But there will be an echo of this in the genome, and it will express itself through psychology.
From observation, I believe this is true, but also biologically it makes sense that women, I think, at least from an earlier age, are under a higher amount of pressure from that system in the genome and in your biology, because a woman has to carry the baby for 9 months and a man does not.
Yeah.
It's like a man can adapt and just sort of spray his seed all over the place. A woman can't do that.
Yeah.
She's got to bear it. So it's like, is the husband going to stick around?
Yeah.
And so she's got to, you know, this is a thing, it's a cultural thing. It's like women mature quicker than men.
They do.
Which seems to be definitely true.
And they do biologically as well.
Yeah.
You know, around the age of 11, girls are way ahead of boys at the same age.
Yeah.
And that's probably because they're, dare I say it, they're available in a Paleolithic or Stone Age environment sooner to compete for dominant males. They have to. So the reproductive age is going to be driven down under competition of a Paleolithic environment for women. Whereas men will take longer to mature physically because of the competition danger. If an 11-year-old boy is competing with a 16-year-old other boy, for women, it's not going to end well in a Paleolithic environment. And you see this acted out now even in school playgrounds as lads grow up. There's this ancient archaic instinct or set of instincts are powering through in that adaptive way. But girls need to compete for the men who are already in a position of power and strength. So they should, by that perspective, mature reproductively earlier.
It does seem to change as well. So you get like a young man, and when you first become cognizant of any of these instincts, at least to some degree, you're interested in a romantic thing. It is much more idealized.
Yeah.
I think it could be a cultural thing. I'm not sure. It then shifts towards what's brought, I guess, pornography in a way. It's like that type of woman. It gets exciting. You have a group of lads together, and it's the one night stands.
Yeah.
Then it always seems to come back again and flip. So it's almost like a stage where you can go out and experiment and spread the seed, and there's not much consequence because men have time. But I've not really seen that in women. It seems like consistently they stick to their particular type of man that they're after within certain variables. But they don't have the time at all available to play the field, really.
No, they don't. That has changed, and there is a cultural effect, obviously, since the 1960s and the cultural revolution, dare I say there, or the countercultural revolution. We've seen changes in that, and we're seeing the results of that. But as a biological template, I think there are some interesting things that are overlooked, and one of them I do think is the idealisation of women that kicks in almost immediately. Part of that is the relationship to the mother, where that's positive. And part of it is there anyway, even when the relationship to the mother is negative, because when you see or encounter boys who've had a bad time with their mothers, they still idealise women, largely. Strange. And the only way I can really make sense of that, given how many hundreds and hundreds of men I've dealt with who've had this kind of issue, is to say that this is genetic without a doubt, and it's very ancient, just as the opposite pole is for women with respect to the bad boy. The bad boy in today's culture will do them no good at all, but they still find themselves attracted to that default without even having to think about it. It's on an instinctive level.
I think that's a very interesting point you make, Stephen. It's one that is frequently overlooked, and I think what it does actually, if we allow as women ourselves to think about it, it actually allows us to play to women's strengths, because you've often said about women that when they're functioning well and relating well to themselves and relating well to men, they have a very calming effect on men.
They do.
And they can be very influential in terms
Massively.
of maybe even decisive in some situations as to whether a particular situation becomes volatile or not, and that could be at a very individual level, or it could be, as you think you were suggesting before, during such times as wartime. Women's expression of their femininity can play positively, that is, can play a huge role in terms of how men react to things.
It can. It can, in terms of getting a definite result. For example, in the First World War, women and their femininity in that sort of traditional sense was used to bring in hundreds of thousands of men into the military.
That's true.
It is true. It was exploited to do that. It was men of England, where are you for your women? And that just brought them in their hundreds of thousands. It was Lord Kitchener's army, and they shamelessly exploited that. Whereas if those women were conceived of as being low value, and I mean that in a biological sense, you would not be able to mobilise the men to fight to defend them, apparently. I know there's all the political reasons for the war, but we're talking about the way instincts were presented and manipulated.
We're interested in the dynamic.
We're interested in the underlying dynamic.
Yeah.
They were able to do that because they exploited the image of the idealised woman, and that brought hundreds of thousands of volunteers.
Yes.
It didn't have to be conscripted.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah. And you could actually see that working now, were that to happen, for example, during some of we see these marches against COVID and so on, people not wanting to wear the masks and the kind of marches for freedom, that if a situation, and I know it probably hasn't happened yet in this way, but if a situation was to emerge whereby the men were called upon to defend the women.
Yeah, that would trigger.
It would trigger.
It would trigger them en masse.
It would, absolutely.
You just need the psychological mix
Yeah.
of the police put in a position, say, where they appear to be predators, and we did predict this would happen.
We did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We predicted. We did on the channel months ago. It's happening right now.
Yeah.
And if you got the right explosive mix of a group of men there and some women being threatened or violated in some way by the police who have been put in this role of being predators, and then somebody just said something akin to the idea of Men of England protect your women, that would kick off a detonation of instinct and violence. So the government and the police have to be very, very, very careful about the way they're handling things. So pepper spraying women in the eyes who are doing nothing, not a good idea. The instincts will take offence at that. And when they do, that's it. Bang, it's going to go.
Well, there was an incident with a young woman recently, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was.
Where that came close to happening. I mean, she was a young single mother, probably about, very lightly built, and she was bundled into the back of a police van.
She was, yeah.
And manhandled,
handcuffed.
and you could see that some of the men were very, very close to going and defending her.
Yeah.
And then obviously, for whatever reason, they backed off or felt that they couldn't follow through.
If she'd have given the signal of distress to them, that would have done it. And it would have been outside of conscious will or intentionality. Collectively, those men would have acted as one unit, and then that would have been the spark. That would have been the shot heard around the world at that point. And it is that fine that you've got to be very, very careful.
It's that close to happening.
It is that close to happening, and it's on the level of instincts. And we're not talking about archetypes here. We're talking about real fundamental things which mobilise groups and mobilise people right down to the level of the genome. Completely different situation. I hope I'm not making a prediction. We did predict on the channel that it would go this far. And we were right, and I think a lot of people thought that it wouldn't happen, and that the police's behaviour, for example, wouldn't turn into predators, but they are doing. The mobbing around like a shoal of piranhas. There'll be 5 or 6 of them on one person in a feeding frenzy, literally like macrophaging individuals. It's not good. It's not good. Not good at all.
I know people, and that's happened to them. It's not even like it's too far out there. Like the data's there. Like you can see people are getting more and more and more upset by this. And you can see that, at least in the UK, I can't speak for other countries, that the police and even the army now are mobilising very close to where we are.
Yeah, there was a situation recently, or at least last year in France. This was pre-COVID, when there was the yellow vest movement, and that was growing exponentially, and the police were becoming more and more weaponised against their own population, and there was talk of bringing the army out. That didn't happen, but if it had, that would have been the ultimate test for the stability of that state. Would the army, under those conditions, side with the police or against them? If they go against them, that is the end. That's the end of that government, and it's the end of the stability in that society. There would have been another French Revolution at that point. It was that close, and then COVID kicked in, and that disappeared. But if you bring the military onto the streets now, and there are soldiers, veterans being arrested by the police, mob-handed, in London at the Cenotaph. We saw 2 yesterday. Their 22-year service in the army, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. That is not the kind of meme or information really that other soldiers will want to see, or the government will want them to see. That's already beginning to lay the foundation of conflict within the state itself, and that could become decisive. I'm not political about it. All I want to make clear is that this is predictable and something can be done to prevent it. What's been done at the moment is not good. It's not right. People are not thinking through this. People in government are not thinking through this properly. If it comes to it, and if you ask the military to decide between the people and what is appearing to be a coercive government, you will get a revolution. I guarantee it. We're not immune from that. Back in 1981, it nearly happened, and people who were alive then may remember it. But the then Home Secretary William Whitelaw said to Margaret Thatcher about the toxic riots in Liverpool, "We are that far away from a revolution," and the army were told to be on standby. And I know that some police officers, because I was one of them, was thinking at that point, this is not good, and I'm not going to be asked, and I will not carry out any orders to fight in a revolution on the streets of our home city against our own people. But now, the police of today, different culture. They're already going too far, in my personal opinion, so we'll see how that pans out.
So you can say that what we're seeing broadly at a political and cultural level is like a clash or a war or a dialectic even between the anima and the animus, between different people, different sects of people, or just as such as a broad category. Would it be fair to say then in the biopsychosocial model you can find the etiology of that down at, say childhood development in a way, not to completely reduce it, but that they reflect each other.
They'll reflect each other, And to go back on topic, back towards the idea of the father complex, it's really the imago, the image of the father that's experienced by boys that's going to shape their impression of their masculinity. It's the prime imprinter of that, what it means to be a man. You learn from your father. Although it's innate genetically, you nevertheless need that relationship to release it. And it's intended that it should be released biologically, and that's why we have culture in the way that we do that provides that way of giving it a safe release. If it's not there, and if the attachment then to the mother is too strong, that brings its own pathology. If the father is domineering, aggressive, abusive and damaging in that way, that will create its own problems, which are horrible to contemplate, obviously, in the life of a child, male or female. So the father's role is very, very important.
So going through that 4-stage schema then, if that's not, or if the second stage, the father's not completely satisfied, you can then infer that someone is probably going to have, almost definitely going to have issues with friends, and issues with finding a relationship, or approaching women, or keeping a woman, or seeing the potential in a woman, or anything like that.
I mean, if you've got a stable enough society which allows peer groups to nurture a young boy, so the compensation for anything that was lacking in the father, if that's there, then that's okay. You can overcome that. But if you're exposed to people who are abusive, other adults in loco parentis who abuse in whatever way that child, then that will further damage that adaptation as well, and then you will get a misdirection of the energy of adolescence coming through. And if it happens to enough young men within a peer group, then you're going to damage the relationship to women and to culture and society as a whole. So in that sense, the father's very, very important.
Can I ask you about a very, very brief case study then, from
please.
my own experience, perhaps to illustrate this? So let's just say a guy comes to me and he can't speak to women. Every time he goes up to a woman, he kind of chokes in himself. He can't do it. He's got strong difficulties relating to other men. There's like a nervousness there that he feels. He's in his mid-20s at the moment. And if we look at his sort of, especially on that in loco parentis thing you're talking about, mother was very overprotective. His father never really supported him, never encouraged him. He was there. He wasn't really there. And then all the teachers were picking on him constantly to be like, you don't. The implication is you don't have potential. You're shy and you can't speak. That was one of them. Is the teachers used to say, you can't speak. Why won't you speak? You can't. Could we say that, I know it's very, very broad brushstroke, but you can see a resonance there between how he is right now and the experience of those things that should have released his instincts genetically in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. The way out of that for him is going to be a reconnection with those instincts, not to become infantilized as a child, but to reconnect with his genetic potential. Now that's the theory of it. The doing of it is unique to each individual, of course, because they live within a context, and that context will support or not any of the different ways that you can achieve that reorientation to instinct. But fundamentally, that's the important thing. And if he were in therapy, that would be the role of the therapist, to help him find the right way to actualize his instincts, to reconnect with them. It's at that level. And this is one of the discoveries, if you like, of neuropsychoanalysis, that things have to be dealt with at the level of instinct and of emotion in order to correct for adaptive problems that have occurred earlier in life.
Do you think, Steve, sometimes, though, I'm thinking about the role of the mother specifically here in terms of how, say, a son would or would not, bond positively with his father, is key as well, because if a mother binds her son too closely to her, and often that is the case, then the son might not, even if the father does have some negative traits, I mean, it may not be the whole picture. It may be that if the son had been allowed to access the father and the father's influence positively, then the father may not have turned on the son in the way that he did, as a way of hitting back at the mother, and that the mother's role is sometimes fundamental in terms of whether a son will access his father's support positively or not.
Definitely. I would say that's definitely the case within the sort of statistically normal family, if I can call it that for now. The mother will control the emotional bonds of everyone, even if the father appears to be dominant, because the subliminal relating and management of relationships will all go through the mother. She's the equivalent of the hypothalamus within the thalamus within the brain. Everything goes through it. It's a relay station, and it's the same with the mother. The mother's the relay station of emotion and relating within the family, and provides a stability that allows the father to be the face of the external world and allows children to feel safe, or should do, within the family. But to go back, I mean, whether I should disclose anything personal or not, what do you think?
It depends how comfortable you are with that. But what I would say is that for women who do that kind of thing, it's so easy to make the father look like the bête noire.
Oh yeah,
he's the one. He's the font of all the difficulty and the destruction and so on. All the negatives that will play into that. But very often it's not the case.
Well, I used to get hit. I'll call it that, by my father quite a lot. My brother didn't, my older brother. I mean, it stopped when I got big enough. But when I was young, you don't know why you're being hit like that. And loads of young men and older men, when they think back, will know about this kind of thing. But after my father died, my mum said to me that your dad would always take out on you anything that was a problem between my mum and my dad. I cannot validate that. This was her account, but I can see where that might be the case. So it's believable enough. But I think Pauline's offering something different there, offering the angle that it may have been caused by my mum, as in creating frustration from her father.
Definitely.
Which then meant that it was downloaded physically into me.
Absolutely. And it must be very difficult for fathers, because like you say, the mother's role is a mother's more involved with her children, generally speaking, and so in that regard she has more influence, both positively and negatively. And men do have a different role to play, and they should have a different role to play. It's valuable in and of itself. But if it's made to appear to be dark and negative and oppressive, it's just like, I guess I'm asking people to ask themselves, if they are having difficulties with their fathers, be they sons or daughters, does the problem lie in the father, or does the problem lie in the interaction between the mother and the father, and therefore there's a different dynamic altogether?
That's a system
playing
then.
out.
It's a systems
and then we're
level,
looking at the
isn't it?
family as a system. Yes, we are indeed.
Yeah.
Would you give a weighting towards mother or father in terms of what you might consider to be statistically more important? Is it the mother, generally speaking? Or is it literally, it's just a system and we've got to see which ones stand out more than others?
I think the father can be replaced more easily, sadly. by a peer group and by institutions, provided those institutions are not abusive in and of themselves, and provided the peer group nurtures the period of puberty and adolescence and adaptation towards relating. Provided that's there, and culture has withstood this over the years, because it's been traditionally men who fight wars and go off and get killed. So in that sense, that mothers were looked on as being more important for maintaining the culture and for bringing up the next generation. And on balance, if that's the question, then I would say the mother is more important. The role of the father, when society is relatively stable for whatever period of time, should be to be the interface with the world outside of the family, and to prepare the child to engage with that. He should represent the world and its limitations. But being abusive, of course, no, that's way too far. But to do that, to be protective, to watch the boundaries, to protect the family from intrusion, from people who would do it harm, to provide, but to give example of action in the world, all of those things are important, and fathers should do that. If a father becomes another mother, there's a conflict there which will offend women at an instinctive level, and it does. I've seen it happen, regardless of any political view on that. So it's best for fathers to be fathers, mothers to be mothers, and then things tend to work out properly.
And then, I guess just to get this clear in my mind, could you say that the friend stage or the peer group stage is an evolutionary fail-safe then?
Yes.
Obviously it serves other purposes, but it's like because you're never ever going to have perfect parents.
No, you never.
No. They're there to sort of pick up the bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Well, what you get with boys is that by the time they go to the peer group, there's an acceptance that they are men in waiting, they are proto-men, and they will be looking out to the wider culture for how men form and bond into groups, military groups, for example. And then the purpose of that group, what is it? It is to protect the tribe or the group. So they will form these adolescent groups, gangs, as a proto-model for that. And of course, as I say, in the past, when there was, I'm going to use the word, I don't mean this in a judgmental way, but wastage due to war of adult men, then the young boys have already been trained. And when you think about the Boy Scouts were really set up to provide a militarised group of young men who could literally move into the military as they got older. They had all sorts of other skills as well, but that was the primary purpose. That's why they were called Scouts. They were being trained, if you like, to think in a military cohesive way in order to defend the nation. That was the role. That was the real role. That's why it was successful. And in the extreme, if you look back into history, when you look at the Spartan education system in Greece, that was really, really severe. But that was all about preparing a new generation of warriors. And you had more than one father, basically, just as Sparta never had one king, always had two, sometimes three, to balance out the power. But that splits the father imago then, because the young boy then refers to the reference group, refers to the elders in the plural rather than one man. So it allowed them to do that and to develop this collegiate view of what it was to be a man. That they were very extreme, of course.
But to come back to Sparta for a moment, I mean, Spartan mothers would give their sons over.
Yeah, they would,
to the fathers, to the men, collectively, wouldn't they, at a certain age?
They would.
Whilst it was a very brutal way of doing things, nonetheless, it marked that transition, that rite of passage, and the release from the mother and into the world of man.
And they had a way of passing over, once they'd confirmed the boy, their son. And a way a mother does that is obviously to give all the love and nurturing that the child needs, and then to allow him to form his identity as being different from her, the separation, which is important. And then you're going to be like your father. Now, the father then should say, yes, you are, but you're not ready yet. I'll give you some idea of what it means to be a man, but you have friends. You have a group of men who'll be like me and my group of men, and you will take over from us as we move on. But the way a mother did that in Sparta was to hand her son a shield and say, come back with this shield or on it, meaning come back as a pile of ashes because you've been cremated after battle. Or you come back with it as a heroic warrior, but you don't come back as a coward. You don't run away. You either come back bearing it as a successful warrior, or you come back as a casualty and be honoured for that. There's no middle ground. You are a man. I'm giving you this shield, and with these words, I confer on you your masculinity. Come back with this shield or on it. Very powerful, you could say, in an archetypal sense, as Jung would understand it. But underneath that archetype, so-called, there are instincts. The mother's instinct to give over her son to the masculine. Because that son would then become a proper warrior, would defend the community, and would allow her to live.
Absolutely, it makes the mother's role so much easier if she allows it, and powerful if she allows herself to do that. And as I think you're about to say, Steve, that releases her as well.
It does.
To become herself.
Not to be over attached.
And not to be overly attached. So in a way, it's a gift to both. If they choose to see it in that way.
But for fathers who don't initiate their sons properly, they are forced either to remain attached to the mother, or to attach themselves to a peer group, a gang, and depending on the psychology collectively of that group, of that peer group, will depend how that young man enters adolescence and how he relates to women. So if the early adaptations to the mother was wrong, and then the father failed as well, there is only the peer group left. And then what's the state of the peer group? Well, you get a reflection on that from the culture as a whole. That will tell you. Gangs will always reflect the state of the culture that they thrive within. When I was very young, in the 1950s, in single figures, my mum bought a set of books from which I learnt my history and learnt a lot of the values that I came to hold. Sorry. I find that very moving. I can't stop it welling up. I don't know if I can do it. It's too much. Simple thing, it's just a picture, but it's what I was talking about before about come back on the shield or on it. That's the picture there on this side, and that was when she tried to get me to link with my father, but also the ancestral line. Wow.
And that's the power women have.
Yeah.
If only
I
they
didn't know consciously that would happen. That just emerged. And at a rational level, what I do know is where that's coming from. I know what part of the brain it's coming from. It's deep in the limbic system, right in the brainstem. It's got nothing to do with left or right cerebral hemispheres, nothing to do with that. It's emotional, and it's to do with instinct, and it's powering right up from the genome itself, where gene expressions triggered that, powered right through the brainstem, right through the emotional part of the brain, and bang out into the cortex, and then boom, lacrimae mundi, boom, right out. That's what Jung called an archetype, but it isn't. It's an instinct. That's a representation of an instinct from culture, and that's where we get this idea of archetypes from. But it's deeper. It's much, much deeper than that, and it's ancient. That's a cultural representation of it. I'm no Spartan, I never have been. But the story encapsulated and created the vessel to express the instinct and the emotion that it powers up. And I had absolutely no defence on that against that. That was involuntary, which is instructive. But for me, but if I were to say, oh, it's an archetype, I would just veer off track, and I wouldn't understand the truth of where that's coming from. But in the context of what we were discussing, that was the image. Yeah.
And you have held a shield, Steve.
I have, yes.
You have.
I have.
Former occupation.
I did, yeah. I did. I have.
Yes,
I have fought hand to hand, and I have had people try and kill me, and I've taken bad. Anyway, I won't go there.
No,
but in the police, of course.
In the police, and they're not the police. We were not the police of today. No. They are different.
And when you had your head injury, you were put on a shield.
I was put on the shield, yeah. Fucking hell, yeah. I was put on the shield and as a makeshift stretcher and dragged down out of a burning vehicle. But I do not support the police of today. I do not support what they do. They do not represent me. No. They don't represent the traditions that I upheld and that I fought for. I have nothing to do with them. I think they're a disgrace. And that's from my heart and from my instinct, from my guts, my gut feeling. I have nothing, no connection to them at all. You are not there to oppress the people. You're not there. That is not your role. Sir Robert Peel would turn in his grave. You should be ashamed of yourselves, all of you. Anyway, that's aside. That's the power of instinct and emotion. Do not mistake it for archetype. Archetype is a cultural representation of instinct.
This is so different to, say, myself and other young men growing up, because I can feel, like a feel phenomenon, I can feel the emotion that's coming up in you. It's real. The young men are today without, say, with the overprotective mums or with the absent fathers, and they form these little groups of friends. It does become a little fantasy land. Yeah. It becomes like personas and narcissism, and let's go out and randomly conquer certain women and things like that. Well, it's sad. And it's like, I think I finally, I think I understood anyway, but it's like that, I think, is the best example you've ever done of instincts versus archetypes. Because take that, it's like, that's an example of an instinct that you feel. Then you look at what the archetypes are, it's like, well, I need to get in touch with this. It's so sterile.
It's hysterical.
It's not going to do anything to protect you, the people you love. It's nothing. It's a waste of time.
It is. And it's not the fault of your generation that you've not been given a chance to do it. I mean, to add to this, at risk of, I'm going to have to repress this heavily, my father did not acknowledge me for what I went through.
No, he never once said he was proud of you.
No.
Not once.
He didn't confirm me at all. So I ended up in gangs, and even when I was, the things that I faced in the police, which I've mentioned before, there was no acknowledgement at all, not even a little bit, for what I was going through. None. And I'm still not discussed at all. I don't think I've got at this moment in time, I don't think I've got the strength consciously to contain it. But I do know it's not an archetype. That was even in relation to my father's failure to confirm me, that is not an archetype, it's an instinct, it's an instinctive need. And if you're unsure about what instincts are, please look up Professor Mark Solms, Solms. He's a professor of neuropsychology. He's one of the founders of the discipline of neuropsychoanalysis. Look up his work, study it, and get real, I'm afraid, about it. Instincts are real, so are emotions. And archetypes are cultural transmissions of stories such as that one from Sparta, which is meant to contain the power of instinct through a narrative that gives you a way of understanding it.
But it's an afterthought compared to the instinct.
It is literally an afterthought. So, look up neuropsychoanalysis, Professor Mark Solms' work. He's on the internet. You can Google him. You can see his lectures, his questions and answers. And for those of you who are qualified therapists, you can go and study neuropsychoanalysis, as in fact us three have. We're completing our own training in neuropsychoanalysis to supplement what we're doing. Mainly because it's exactly congruent with what Paul and I have been doing for the past 40 years, because we know from real life experience that instincts are real. We do understand what archetypal images are, otherwise we couldn't be creative in the way that we are. We couldn't have written all the film scripts, got all these Hollywood directors and actors on side. We know what they are. They are a vehicle for the expression of instinct, but instinct is the root of it all. Although beneath that there is the genome itself. Understand that fact. You have a biological self that includes your psychological self, that anticipates your sociological self as a continuum, as James said, of interacting systems biopsychosocially. Don't divide yourself up, don't reduce yourself.
Yeah, I think when you say that, you get a few comments sometimes that are like, why are you attacking me with that? It's like, it's one, that's complete and utter bollocks, and two, you're doing it because you've seen the amount of pain people have gone through, and then the systems that are currently very popular online or in real life that all they do is seek to contain people and perpetuate that suffering.
Mm.
It's not. It's your instinct to help heal.
Yeah.
Is what's coming out.
Absolutely. I have seen terrible things, and Pauline's seen terrible things in the NHS, and the abuses and the terminal suffering of people who are in a psychologically distressed state. And yeah, I did the frontline work in the police, and I was still doing the psychotherapy training and experience as well, and I was divided neurotically between those two. One which was an adaptation to the outer world, the other which at the time was purely personal development, and then that became my adaptation to the outer world, working clinically with people. But we all have to go through that phase of being quite fundamentally divided and neurotic, because our instincts will push us, and that's the task of life, is to adapt to them. Then you discover who you are. Individuation is the unfolding of your genome. That's what it is.
Yep.
It's the timed release of your genome. That's individuation. Now you can engage with that psychologically and make it more Jungian, but it happens anyway. We all eventually become who we are, but you can become more of who you could have been if you engage consciously. That's the best part of Jung's approach to it, is that fact that you can consciously engage with it, and you don't have to give yourself up to unconscious forces or to social pressures or cultural pressures. And the task for this generation is like none other. I feel for the guys out there who haven't been given a chance. They've been neutered. They've been neutered, not been given a chance to go through these ancient instinctive processes of adaptation and challenge. I really do feel for them. It does not diminish you, lads. It doesn't. Oof. You're up there with the best of every generation that went before you. Don't doubt it. Sorry. That needs to be said. Because too many people are pulling them down. Sorry. I'll recover momentarily, I hope.
You're infecting me with the fucking emotion as well now, aren't you?
Sorry about that.
You can't avoid it either.
No, you can't.
I so want to say so many things, but I can't. It's too personal about
Can't
people that I
repress
care.
it. Yeah, can't repress it. It's too strong. Right from the brainstem and right from your genome as well. That's where this comes from. That's what instinctive pressure is. That's what you feel, and it becomes emotion. Emotion is the conscious realization of instinct, which is otherwise apparently unconscious. It's not. Instinct does have consciousness and intentionality all of its own. It's ego consciousness, which is cognitive. That's its limit. If you feel something, you're feeling it really deep down in your genome.
And that's numinous.
That's numinous. That is truly numinous. Just like when somebody falls in love and is animated at that level, that has nothing to do with archetypes. Archetypes are the product of the process of being in love and being animated from your genome through your instincts. It's an after effect of that. It's not the cause of it. That's how you understand the process of falling in love. It's how you understand hate. It's how you understand anything which is fundamental and meaningful in life. It's all reducible, but in a meaningful and numinous way to instinct.
It doesn't lack meaning.
It doesn't
for being instinctive.
It gives meaning.
It's not animalistic as people believe.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
No, it gives meaning to life. To be in touch with your instincts, to be separated from them, is to be profoundly distressed and neurotic. Yeah. To be divided to that extent. Please resist it. If you're under any kind of cultural pressure to deny your biology, to deny your ancestral inheritance, that's a fundamental neurosis. Deny it. You don't have to be aggressive. Instincts aren't aggressive. They're all about adaptation, optimal adaptation. That doesn't mean killing people. It means relating properly. That's where Jung's anima comes into it. And the role of the father should be to bring young men through these adaptive phases of instinct, but he has to know what his instincts are himself. That he has to provide the stability, the masculine stability for his son or for his daughter. He has to face the world. He has to be the face of the world, but not be harsh or cruel. To provide the process of adaptation to what is a dangerous environment. to give both protection but confirmation, to release the children out into the world so that they've been prepared to face what's out there.
But the women and the mothers have to allow that to happen.
They do, yeah, they do.
Where the father's intentions are good, they have to allow and encourage that.
They should. They should. Anyone who's out there suffering, and they're into NoFap and all this stuff as well, it's fundamentally about instinct. The energy that's going into that is normal libido. It's normal energy for life that's being perfected into something else. The same with the pornography. Pornography is a symbolic representation of instinct. It's virtual. Mark Solms talks about this. He doesn't say about pornography, but he says it about thinking and about the justification that comes from cognition. Yeah. It's virtual. It's not real. It's not real life. So if you use pornography, you're having a virtual connection to your instincts rather than an actual one. That doesn't mean go out and do horrible things that you see in pornography. It's as horrible as it needs to be to compensate for the suppression of your instincts. If you bring your instincts up properly, they level out. And you find this whether it's anxiety, depression, whether it's OCD or anything else. When you get in touch with your instincts, they back off, the feeling charge reduces, you feel better, you're more adapted. That's why they're the most fundamental thing that you have to deal with, not the fantasy of archetypes. That's the blue pill, I'm afraid. Archetypes are a blue pill, instincts are a red pill.
Thank you for watching this episode of Jung To Live By. If you haven't already, make sure you download our free PDF for integrating your shadow. It includes the most advanced theory on the topic available anywhere on the internet, as well as a full practical breakdown. If you've ever wanted to integrate your shadow, this is honestly the way to do it. Thanks again for watching, and take care.